Well, I was going to say it this way. The articles of impeachment arrive in the Senate. Couldn't and shouldn't, this goes back to my advice I'm going to give, and I'm going to throw it out to you. Couldn't Mitch McConnell dispose of this travesty right off the bat? I think this, even setting a precedent for these two articles of impeachment, abuse of process and obstruction for not going to court, abuse of process on these nebulous, flawed grounds, is ridiculous. I would either dismiss it or decide it immediately. I wouldn't entertain this nonsense at all. Thoughts?
There's no question that these two articles of impeachment are unconstitutional. They do not satisfy the constitutionally required criteria for impeachment. President Trump's lawyers could make a motion to dismiss, or one of the senators could make a motion to dismiss and take a vote right away. Whether they decide to do that or not will be up, obviously, to the members of the Senate, maybe to the Chief Justice initially, but I have absolutely no doubt that the two articles of impeachment, abuse of power, which every president since Adams has been accused of by their political opponents, and obstruction of Congress, which is another way of saying the president exercised separation of powers and checks and balances in an entirely proper way, should never come to actual trial. It's
right.
Like charging somebody with a non-crime and then the lawyer making a motion to dismiss, which would be granted.
Yeah, the more I was thinking about this, Greg, and I'm going to get into Romney in a second, but the more I was thinking about this tonight, getting ready for the show, I thought, we have all this important stuff bearing down on us, let alone a presidential election in November, and Mitch McConnell's going to sit up there and entertain like motions and have this travesty play out. This thing has been held in the House for obvious reasons, a failed strategy, whatever. But this is a flawed, constitutionally infirm two articles of impeachment, and even entertaining this in a trial, to me, sets a terrible and dangerous precedent.
Well, I agree with you. It lends legitimacy to illegitimate articles of impeachment. The second one is an utter joke, obstruction of Congress for asserting a legal right to resist a subpoena. If Congress disagreed, their remedy is to go to federal court. It's always been that way. So that one should immediately be dismissed. There was a motion to dismiss in the Clinton impeachment trial. It failed because there were nearly a dozen felony offenses identified as abuse of power by the independent counsel, Ken Starr. Here, there are no felony offenses. There are no high crimes and misdemeanors. They talked ad nauseum about extortion and bribery, and in the end they realized there was no evidence for that, so they conjured this wonderfully amorphous term, abuse of power. And I agree, there ought to be, and there probably will be, a motion to dismiss, and it should be seriously considered and voted upon.
51 votes is what you need. You got to get Manchin, Joe Manchin, and a couple of them were middle of the road
Doug Jones, Alabama. Yeah,
Joe. I'd go to Doug Jones and Manchin and say, this is ridiculous. We know this is ridiculous. This is terrible for the country. And Mitch McConnell's got it. I think there's too much messing around with this. I thought about this a lot tonight. Alan, Democrats lost their gambit to dictate the terms of impeachment, clearly. So now they're essentially just smearing the Senate.
Look, it hurts me as a liberal Democrat.
And it allows the president to basically dictate how the Senate is going to conduct its trial. If the Senate becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of the White House, then absolutely the Congress will no longer be an equal branch of government.
Yeah, so Alan, that's basically what Bernie Sanders is saying too. I mean, he's saying we should just ignore the Senate in some cases. This is what happens when you have a fraudulent impeachment proceeding at the outset. This is where it's gone.
Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 65 said the greatest danger is for impeachment to turn on how many votes one party could have against the other party. And that's exactly what happened. Look, it would be ideal if we had impeachments that were neutral, objective, bipartisan. That's what the framers had in mind. But this case doesn't rise to that level in any sense. And so it was partisan in the House. They created the rules of engagement, making it partisan, rushing to judgment, and then delaying judgment. And suddenly they expect the Senate to ignore partisan affiliations. In an ideal world, that would happen. But in the political world created debated
Never.
by the House of Representatives, it's unlikely to happen.
Greg, here's what Romney said, Senator Romney from Utah said about having more witnesses testify.
There's the, if you will, the Clinton impeachment model, which is to say that we have opening arguments and then we have a vote on whether or not to have witnesses. That's the approach I favor. And at that point, I'll be voting in favor of considering witnesses, including John Bolton. Yes, yeah. I mean, he's someone who I would like to hear from.
I have no word. I have no words for Mitt Romney. I supported him in 2012. I mean, I like Mitt Romney. I have no words for him. Okay, just none. That I can
Romney
say on TV.
belongs to the Romney Party.
What is this?
And that's about it.
What's in the water in Utah? That's my question. I love Utah, so don't send me emails. What about this, Greg? There are reports that 4 Republicans now want more testimony.
Well, we'll
is that
wait
a
and
cause
see.
for concern?
It is a cause for concern because they're essentially asking for the Senate to, which is a jury, to do the job of prosecutors in the House. The prosecutors in the House had a chance to subpoena people like Bolton or Mick Mulvaney or Rudy Giuliani. They didn't do it. The one subpoena they issued, they withdrew. And now all of a sudden, Nancy Pelosi is trying to engage in a quid pro quo to extort the Senate to do the job that the House was supposed to do, at the same time accusing the president of an impeachable quid pro quo. The hypocrisy and irony is lost on no one.
But nobody should forget that John Bolton doesn't get the last word as to whether he testifies. He may want to testify,
That's right.
but it's the president's decision whether to invoke executive privilege.
He told
And
me
if
he
the
was going to
president
invoke
does,
it. Yeah, he
if
told
he
me on
does,
Friday.
right,
Yeah, he told me
then
that
it
on
goes
Friday.
to court, and
Yeah.
the courts will
And he
decide.
has
It's
every right to
hard to
invoke it.
imagine anything more privileged than conversations about the national security between the president and his national security advisor in the Oval Office.
Apparently, Mitt Romney doesn't think so, and I don't know about Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, but if they could put aside their, dislike for some of what the president says or does for the Constitution and what's good for the country, they'd get thumbs up from me and a lot of other people. So, gentlemen, thanks so much. And coming up, did y'all notice that former Obama administration officials last week rushing to defend Iran? Now, what might that be about? Investigative reporter Lee Smith has uncovered shocking connections. We're going to bring him here next.